Guadalcanal, which we'll talk about next, is perhaps one of the great examples of this type of island hopping campaign. Guadalcanal was seen as the first stop in the Solomon Islands, which had to be retaken. But it was here that we met some of the very first stiff resistance of the Japanese. We were able to quickly take the airfield there, but then our carrier fleet that had supported us from the air decided to leave, citing that it had lost too many fighters. And so some 10,000 Marines, who would eventually be reinforced by other Marines and by a few ships and a little bit of air support, were largely left alone to take over the island. It was these Marines who had to sustain suicidal bayonet charges, often at night. In fact, one saw 815 Japanese come at them with bayonets, charging over and over again, these kind of maniacal, suicidal-like attacks. Eventually, these Japanese would charge at the tanks. None of them would surrender. Many of them would be rolled over by the wheels and the tracks of the tanks. In fact, one American commander said, rather grotesquely but accurately, that the tracks of the tank looked like meat grinders after this particular charge. In other words, the Japanese were willing to meet this violent end. They were fighting for their emperor, but they were primarily fighting for their honor. It was also here that the Japanese ships, who largely controlled many of the shorelines around the island of Guadalcanal, fired on American foxholes at night and were regularly resupplied by troops that was known as the Tokyo Express, a fast shipping route from Japan and other places down to Guadalcanal. Eventually, Guadalcanal was taken, but it took 6 months. It took the loss of 2 of our cruisers, 6 of our destroyers, and nearly 1,600 Marines. The Japanese would lose over 25,000. Those kinds of losses were typical. Those kinds of losses were losses that the Japanese could not actually replace. Those kinds of losses, though, showed us what it was going to take to actually conquer this empire of Japan. And as I mentioned, the Guadalcanal was seen as the first stop in just the Solomon Islands, which was one stop of many, all by itself. In other words, the Pacific Campaign took an incredible endurance and hope. It also took, or also showed, that is, the absolute need for an unconditional surrender by Japan as well.